On this week's episode, I'm joined by Audrey Gillan. Audrey is originally from Scotland. She's an award-winning writer who wanders the world and tells stories. And her work has been featured in The Guardian, The Sunday Telegraph, The Herald, The Scotsman, The Washington Post, The London Review of Books, Esquire magazine, The Los Angeles Times, and National Geographic. And a few months ago, Audrey changed her chaotic life in London for the quiet island of Armona on the eastern Algarve. And this is her story. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life. And it's another first. We are joined by the first guest sitting on an island and the first guest wearing sunglasses in an interview because it's so bright. Audrey Gillen, I'm really happy for you to join us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Bon dia.
Bon dia. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. I'm on a very small island in the eastern Algarve called Armona, and I've been here since the 1st of November during the second confinement in Portugal, or what would be the third in my home country, the UK. So I feel very lucky to be here. I've spent the winter and the spring here, so it's been fantastic.
Wonderful. It's a beautiful island. We'll get into that. We'll get more into that as we go along. But maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about you.
So I'm a freelance journalist and broadcaster. I have a background in newspapers in the UK. I was latterly a senior reporter with The Guardian. I've worked in other newspapers. I've also worked on the Washington Post when I was a younger journalist. I won a fellowship to work there. Oh. And I took what we would call in the UK voluntary redundancy from The Guardian about 10 years ago and went off to try and be a screenwriter because I'd written a television drama about my time as an embedded journalist in the war in Iraq. And it was bought by one of our biggest broadcasters in the UK, but after a year, unfortunately, it didn't get made. I went on to write another few screenplays and some radio dramas, but whilst I was doing that, I also started doing travel writing with a particular focus on food, which was great because I got to travel the world and eat everything. So that was fantastic and is still fantastic. If the pandemic was not here, and sort of slightly put the screenwriting to one side for a while. Okay,
so let's talk about your island. Many people won't know about Armona. I know about it. It's such a beautiful part of the world, right there on the estuary on the eastern Algarve. But tell us a little bit about where you are.
So Armona is for close to the old fishing town of Olhão. You come down to the jetty there and take a small ferry over to Armona. When you're coming over in the ferry from Olhão, you'll find that most people who live on the island have a Rolser-style shopping trolley, or what I would call, in being Scottish, a granny trolley. And that's filled with their supplies because there's 3 shops on the island, but obviously their stock is quite limited. And you come over, and then when you get here, there are no cars. There's no, there's a few restaurants. There's no cars. There's just this path, the Passadeira, that goes down the middle of the island, and then it stops, and that's almost kind of like possibly a mile. And then from there, there's a wooden boardwalk down to the beach. So settled around the main Passadeira that cuts through the island are houses on either side, and then it kind of goes back a little bit. And these are mostly kind of low style, one level holiday houses. And so when I arrived, the vast majority were shuttered up. There is a small community that stays here all year round, which is a mix of Portuguese people and foreigners like me who've come to the island, fallen in love, bought a property generally, or, like me, there's a few of us who came in the pandemic, and rented, found a house that was closed up and spoke to someone and got it opened up and rented it.
Amazing. Why have you fallen in love with this place?
I fell in love with it before I came this time around. I fell in love with the Eastern Algarve about 10 years ago. I'm very good friends with the Portuguese journalist and food writer called Celia Pedroso, who I first met when I came to Lisbon for the very first time. She lives in Lisbon and she now does food tours in Lisbon. And we came down here at the invitation of some British people who own a very nice, chic resort here. Hotel, it's not resort, hotel here, boutique hotel called Fazenda Nova. And it was interesting for us because her father was an editor of a very, very famous magazine in the UK called The Face. It was a very kind of famous music and film and fashion, very, very trendy. And they had all this old collection of all these magazines, and it was just like very funky. And we came down here, stayed in the hotel, and we came to Olhão, and then we came to Armona. And from then, I've just always said, so we must go back and rent a house in Armona. So I've been coming back and forward to Olhão, coming to Armona for the day, but never really staying. And what happened was I'd come here from London primarily because I had made a podcast, which is a series for the BBC called On the Ground. It was about my experience in the war in Iraq, but it was also an investigation of a particularly serious incident, which I'm not going to go into because this is about the simple life, not the traumatic life. And I had been in London during lockdown, living on my own in my small flat in Spitalfields, making this very traumatic, very hard work podcast. We came out of lockdown and we were allowed to kind of go around a little bit, and I'd gone to Scotland. And then came back to London, and it was becoming very clear to me that lockdown 2 was going to happen sooner rather than later. And my family are from Scotland, as you can hear. And I wasn't going to be able to visit them in Scotland, and I just really couldn't face, another summer, another lockdown in that flat. But the biggest issue was there's a museum being constructed outside my window, and so from dawn until dusk, there's this massive grinding noise, blah blah blah, everything else. So that was a real motivating factor to get out of there. And I thought I would come to Olhão. And I rented a house for a month, but someone else was coming into that rental after me. So I asked around, and I moved into a very, very beautiful house, which is owned by a British designer. But after a few days, I realised there was a building site next door, and that the concrete mixer on the roof started at 7:30 in the morning. So one of the very biggest drivers away from London, one of the reasons I came here was for peace and quiet. It wasn't there. And so I looked into moving to the island, and I did that on the 1st of November, and it was the best decision that I could have made. Lots of people say to me, why are you living there on your own, and why are you not coming over to Olhão so much? And obviously, one reason is because we had a confinement here, and travel and everything, and so I would only go once a week for shopping anyway. But another reason is that I love it here so much because it is the simple life, and because I'm very, very lucky to be able to embrace that. It is as a consequence of the pandemic that I'm here, and I wouldn't have spent this time here. I wouldn't have been able to probably rent this house. I wouldn't be able to afford it in high season because it is a big house. It's not on the beach, but it looks over the sand dunes onto the beach, and it's very quiet. There's no the only noise there is that in the morning when the fishing boats are going out, and you probably did hear something, during the course of the interview you might hear there's a track there. and little 4x4s go up and down, but not all the time. So there was a little one from the camera being the council, a green one, and they're doing gardening, and they just went past as we were talking.
Amazing. Okay, first of all, I could hear that you're Scottish, and I have a number of Scottish clients out here, and it's funny because whenever we have meetings with some of my Portuguese colleagues, they bring me along to translate, even though my clients are speaking English, because the accent is a strong one. It's a strong one, but the island, there's no cars, there's no construction, so I mean, you definitely got the quiet life there.
Sorry, there is construction.
Oh, there is?
Yeah, but it is just renovations of very small houses, and it's not massive. But there's not construction where this house is, so I'm very lucky. But there is, and there's more now as families who own, and do remember some of these little old houses have been in families for decades.
Yeah,
as they kind of get ready for ready for the summer season, which people are doing, or if they have sold it to someone else who's moving in. So there is some, but it's not next to me, so I'm still in bliss. I hope saying this doesn't jinx it now.
It shouldn't. I hope not either. I can't make any guarantees. Audrey, take us back to your first sort of visits and experience of Portugal. What was that like? What surprised you? What grabbed you? Take us back to those times.
Well, my first visit with it was with a Scottish friend of mine, where we came to Lisbon for a long weekend, and it would have been about 12 years ago. And we'd become friends with two people, Celia Pedroso, who I just mentioned, and Lucy Pepper, who's British but has lived in Portugal for decades. And they came to meet us at the airport because we'd become friendly with them on Twitter. So that was the first indication of the warm-hearted, sort of kind nature of Portuguese people, or like Lucy, who's pretty much become Portuguese in that way of adopting all those amazing traits. And then we both fell in love with Lisbon. We hung out with them. They showed us the best of Lisbon. But then from there, I came back and forward, and I stayed with Celia in her nice flat, and we came down here. And so I spent a lot of time in Lisbon, but also having come down to the Eastern Algarve and seeing how different it was for me, how the Ria Formosa is incredibly special. Dylan, you know that. It's a nature reserve. It's just so much bird life. People are clam picking, there's just little boats, and it's just beautiful. And so I would, even if I could just come for a 4-day weekend, I would do it. And I've been doing that over the years since. So and then of course I've traveled all around Portugal, pre-pandemic, writing about it. Plus also over the last few years, maybe it was about 3 years ago now, I worked together with the Portuguese chef called Nuno Mendes, who is a famous chef in London, but is now the executive chef, consultant chef at the newly refurbished Bairro Alto Hotel in Lisbon. And he did a book which was called Lisboeta of Lisbon. And also, as you know, a Lisboeta is a person who is from Lisbon. So it was a story of him being from Lisbon. It was a story of the city. And I was the person who helped with the writing of that. So that meant that I spent, I would come to Lisbon, I would rent an apartment, I would stay for a while, and then go back to London, do some things, and come back and forward. So my experience of Portugal is varied, and it's not short.
Beautiful. You mentioned that your friend Lucy has adopted some of those Portuguese customs and things. How has Portugal changed you, Audrey?
Well, there's things about Portuguese people that I think I have naturally anyway, because I'm from Glasgow. Lots of people think that Glaswegian people are like Portuguese people are like Glaswegian people in the sunshine. That's what I've been told. It's a bit of a cliche, obviously, and you know, it's you can't apply that across the board to everyone, but that's what I've been told. But you know, I do think that having come from Glasgow, I'm sort of more warm towards meeting people when I first meet them than, say, people from other cultures and stuff. And that's what I find the best about the Portuguese. Plus, also, we like to say hello to people for no reason when we don't know them as well. And I love that. I love that the day is punctuated by bon dia, boa tarde, boa noite. You know what time it is then, and I love the fact that people do it. And I think, you know, more so on the island, you know, no one would walk past you without saying it to you.
It's true. I that was something that I learned when I first came, that you know, if you walk into a little cafe and you don't say bon dia to everyone, it's not the way to do things. You have to greet. You have to say hello, and people will greet without any reason. So yeah, it's a beautiful part of the culture. Audrey, do you want to just tell us a little bit about some of the articles that you've written about Portugal? I know you've done some work with National Geo and The Guardian, and that's actually how I came into contact with you, was because of your article about being locked down on the island. So just tell us a little bit about some of those pieces that you've written.
Well, the one that you just spoke about is one of the pieces that I've had the most, you know, apart from, you know, being embedded in the war in Iraq, and then the podcast that I did about that, where people were, you know, writing to me about that very passionately. People responded to me writing about my time on the island so well. Now, I, as a journalist, very often shy away from writing in the first person. I was brought up as a pretty hardcore journalist, and I reported on, you know, terrible murders and war and everything else. And I also I'm not really that interested in, you know, exposing the inner workings of me. And yet, when I sat down, the Guardian travel editor asked me to write that. And when I sat down to write it, it just flowed. And telling the story of, you know, leaving London, running away from the noise and going to Olhão and then running away from the noise there, and trying to explain that I wasn't breaking the rules when I did it, because we were allowed to travel at that point, but also trying to say, you know, I do feel guilty, not use the word living in paradise, because it is paradise, but like that just annoys people, and trying to strike up a balance of, yes, I'm very, very lucky to be here. It was a bit of an accident, but also acknowledge that, you know, people are going through hell at the moment. And also saying, you know, it's not all easy. It's not all, I mean, I'm sitting with my sunglasses on, and I'm sitting with my sunglasses on because it's very sunny. Plus also I've got an allergy and I don't want you to see my puffy eyes. But like, you know, you do get lonely and everything else, but there's so many mitigating factors of making this a very, very good experience for me, and very, very helpful for my mental health, which I wouldn't like to say what that would have been like had I remained in the small flat in Spitalfields. And the reaction to all of that, and me, you know, explaining about myself, but then going in to introduce people to some of the characters on the island, like this is the second house that I've rented, but in the first house there was a neighbour who lives in a shack at the back, and he'd come down every day and he would take water from the tap in the house next to the one I was in, owned by the same people. And then also when the tide was out, he would empty his bucket. I'll leave it to the imagination what was in the bucket. And then there became a sort of nice exchange where he would give me sardines and, this and that, and I would give him things, and, I asked him if he wanted soup, and he said that no, soup was for babies. And then Christmas Eve, which is obviously more important to Portuguese people than Christmas Day, he brought me an old coffee jar, which he'd filled with sand, and he'd put like branches of a pine tree in it, and then he'd got gold milk bottle tops and put thread through them, and hung them on with yellow flowers and cotton wool snow. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you, Dylan, and say that in my head, he made that. The greater likelihood is that somebody else gave it to him and he decided to give it to me. But in my head, he made it for me. And so when he gave me it, I burst into tears. Mm. So, so people loved that, and they loved the some of the characters in the island, but me also saying, I've come here on my own, but yeah, I've made friends.
Beautiful. I mean, one of the things that I love here is how there is this sort of, it truly is, there is a true melting pot in Portugal where somehow different cultures, different nationalities, along with local Portuguese people, just somehow manage to all get along. And that's something that you've alluded to and mentioned on the island as well. Has that been your experience?
Oh, absolutely. So the people that owned the house that I rented before were from Belgium. The woman that owns this house is Dutch. My neighbour's Dutch. My island mother, the woman who's adopted me, Pam Pardo, she owns a restaurant at the ferry side of the island called Armona 4 with her husband, who's Portuguese, Zé Pardo. She's British, so there's just British people and all of that, but also Portuguese people. There's one of the guys who goes by on a 4x4 every day just waves at me every single time he comes past. So it's a great community. I mean, obviously for me, it's a real shame that my Portuguese hasn't really improved, and I'm blaming lockdown for that and not laziness. Because, I'm not sitting, we weren't allowed to socialise. I wasn't sitting trying to talk to Portuguese people, and, anyone that I was talking to was speaking English. But obviously there's sort of like groups of friends who are mixed Portuguese and, these British people and all of that. So there's a lovely mix on the island. And then, of course, in summer, it must be kind of crazy with all the island is full, and it's all nationalities, and all the Portuguese people would be coming back to their houses, or their families would be, coming, and all of that. So must be fun.
I mean, you spoke about in the article how this was really sort of a last minute thing, and you met, a lot of it is by chance that you've ended up there. But there's so much warmth in the way you write. You spoke about how it flowed, how it just flowed for you when you wrote in the first person. You can see the reaction. People have responded to this because there is this warmth in the way that you write about your experience. Because for me, it just sounds to me like this is more than just a temporary thing that's happened. The way that you write, it sounds like you're home.
Well, did I tell you that I've got my application in for residency?
No.
Okay. So it's more complicated because of Brexit, which I'll just be very clear, I was not in favour of.
Sure.
And so being here before the 31st of December, British people who were here and can prove that they were here and wish to apply for residency can. I should have done it, Dylan, before the 31st of December, but my head wasn't quite in that space. And now the procedure has completely changed, and there's a backlog because of because of the pandemic. But they haven't actually. There's a backlog, and also they haven't revealed what the process is. But my application is in with SEF, and whilst I have to leave this house on the 15th of May, I'm staying in Portugal. I'm going to go on the road and do some stories and hang around until Seth tells people like me what to do. So things for me have completely changed, which is that I've come here and I thought I don't want a life anymore. So, and I certainly don't want to live in that flat in London.
Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Audrey, you've done some interesting stories. You mentioned the being in, I think, was it Iraq or Iran? Sorry, Iraq. You've been all over the world with your work. You've traveled also with food journalism, things like that. I want to come back to the food because that's always a favorite subject on the podcast. But what do you think makes Portugal special and unique and different to a lot of these places that you've traveled throughout the world?
Well, it's not a large country, but it's geographically diverse. It's got vibrant cities, great coastal areas. It's, I think it's history that it was an Atlantic-facing country, which backed on was pretty much landlocked at the back, and yet this very, very tiny country built ships and went off around the world. Now we do know, and we're not going to hide the fact that it was also a really bad thing in the sense of the colonialism and the slavery and the people that died. But culturally, it did make this tiny little country develop in terms of flavour and culture and style and everything else in ways that it wouldn't have had it not ventured out. It would have been a sort of pretty backward place. Its history means that it was a very dark place for a very long time under Salazar, and it's a fascinating place to be, to watch this sort of rebirth from poverty and political, where the people were not allowed to sort of have a joyful life. The country is waking up from a slumber over the last 15 years, and that's amazing. And Portuguese people to me are really kind of warm and open, and I love the food and I love the wine.
Okay, so you took us there. You took us to food and wine. You've done some food journalism. I mean, what's special about the food? What's special about the wine?
Well, firstly, so you've got the Atlantic, and then you've got the Serra, the mountains, and also the Barracal. So you have the most amazing seafood, which has just been caught, particularly, if you're somewhere like where I am, which is just next to Olhão, with an incredible fish and seafood market. But also cities like Lisbon are okay. It's on the River Tagus, but the sea is just there, and that fish is coming in so fresh and so diverse, and the seafood is just incredible. That makes it, other countries import a lot of seafood in Europe, but the Portuguese have so much great stuff of their own. The produce is incredible, the fresh vegetables, the tomatoes, the oranges, everything. So the produce is incredible. But ultimately, it's also a cooking style that's quite simple. A lot of that based on a lack of not resources, but a lack of money, and therefore ingredients were stretched out. And so you will see, a sourdough, which is kind of pretty much old reconstituted bread, with a little bit of olive oil or whatever, things are really eked out. So that element of simplicity of the food, people think, oh, Spanish food is better than Portuguese food. It's just that it's much more simple here, and just as good.
Lovely. You mentioned that you're going to be traveling around a little bit, writing a few stories, seeing a bit more of the country. Where are you off to? What have you got planned?
My first trip is to Porto. I will be going up there in May, and I'll be doing a piece for National Geographic Traveller, and that's like a city guide, but it's primarily food focused, but I will be doing other activities. I have a meeting tomorrow with the Azores tourist office about potentially going to the Azores. I've never been there. I've been to Porto before, never the Azores. And I will spend some time in Lisbon, and I'm just looking for other ideas for stories. We spent about a week a few years ago driving around the Alentejo. I loved it there, but there are areas that that are on my mind that I haven't been yet. But I mean, I can't stay forever, but I can stay until I know what's happening with my residency, and then I can go home and sort my life out and come back.
You can stay forever. It's fine. You're welcome. Yeah. Well, there's some.
The paperwork.
I can't help with the paperwork. I'll be a witness. No, there's so many places. It's what makes this place so special. You can go. I mean, we just did it on the weekend. We drove an hour, and we were in a place that didn't even look like Portugal. It was just, it didn't even look like our part of Portugal. So there's just so many places that are so diverse and so different, and it's just a great place to explore. So I'm sure you'll find plenty of surprises along the way. Should be good. Audrey, I mean, how can people stay in touch with what you're doing and your work and follow you online?
So I have my own website, which is audreygillan.com, and Gillan is spelled Gillan. I am on Twitter, Audrey Gillan. I am on Instagram, Audrey Gillan. I have a podcast available to listen to, which is the one I told you about being in Iraq. It's a 9-part series. It is available on all good podcast hosting networks such as Apple and Spotify and whatever else. I can't remember where half the podcast place is called On the Ground. I have another one called Tara and George, which is also quite hard work, which is about it's where I made a podcast with 2 homeless people living around the corner from me in Spitalfields, and I spent 2 years talking to them, sitting on the ground in the rain, talking to them. So there's another contrast. In the middle of winter, just sitting on the pavement talking to 2 homeless people. So that was pretty hard work. So I do realise that sitting here where I can see the sea from the window is really blessed.
Yeah. I mean, everybody knows about the weather in Portugal. It's always easy to compare summers, but I mean, compare winters. For your winter compared to a winter here. Yeah. Someone's coming in the door.
Hello. Hi, sweetheart. I'm here, but I'm doing a podcast interview. Sorry, Dylan.
This is for you.
We're nearly finished. Where are you going? Sorry. Can you, or do you want me to explain who that was?
Yeah, you can tell us what happened. It sounds like somebody just left something for you.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. So in the story that I wrote, one of the characters in the story that I wrote was Ulrika. Ulrika lives here on the island on her own as well. And she left India because of the pandemic as well, but where she lives in a very, very small village. And she has her own charity, and she built a skate park in the middle of nowhere for these really deprived kids in this small village. And she teaches the kids learn that they can skate, but they're also taught that if they don't go to school, they don't get to skate. So she's pretty incredible, but she also has a massive background in tech, and she was like a tech pioneer. And she traveled around a bit in Portugal and came to the island. And she's been away for a couple of days doing an interview with some sailors. So that was her just turning up. She's obviously brought me something back from her trip. But she's like my friend that we go for walks. So she's just come back and put that in there. And I have to say, I should have told her I was doing this. I had some notion in my head that she might come in and interrupt. But actually, that was all part of the colour of being here on the island, isn't it?
Yeah, that's okay. We're gonna leave that part in.
Okay.
Audrey, I'll put links in the show notes of the podcast so that people can follow you. All those places. I'm also going to leave links to the articles you've written, especially the one for the Guardian and what you've written in the Nat Geo, so that people can read some of those beautiful pieces that you've written about Portugal. And then people will be able to follow everything that you're doing, and hopefully the future projects as well. So we're excited to see what comes next. But a question that we ask all of our guests: Portugal, the simple life. Why?
Well, I just explained about the simplicity of food, the purity of food, the seafood. The people, they're just very easy to get on with. And then, I'm sitting on this very, very simple island where I have been living the simple life since November. And whilst that may well have been the coldest winter in the Algarve in 10 years, for me, the weather has still been incredible. So everything about it, but that simplicity of people, food, culture. I mean, the culture isn't simple. All appeals to me. The only thing that really isn't simple is the language.
Give it time.
Okay.
You might get. I'm sure you'll pick it up as you go. Wonderful. Audrey, I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your time. I hope you can stay in touch. If you're ever up around Abydos area, there's lots of history and culture here that I'm sure you'd enjoy. Let me know and we can meet. But for now, I'm going to let you call it.
Okay. Muito obrigada, Dylan. That's a wrap.
So thank you once again to Audrey, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We'd love to hear from you. And as we say in Portugal, abraço. Welcome to the simple life.